a completely different level of application of sanctions. And of course, the nature of weaponry, the nature of war has today fundamentally changed. We have seen that in multiple conflicts, starting with Azerbaijan-Armenia, Ukraine-Russia, Israel-Iran. We have seen politically that alliances and understandings are being revisited. In the case of China, I think while they had clearly mastered the old system as we know it, being caught between US and China is a very difficult predicament. And when it comes to finance, what we have seen in the last few years is, of course, a completely different level of application of sanctions. We have even seen the seizure of sovereign assets. We have seen the advent of crypto. As I said, by every metric, even in terms of resources today, the competition for rare earths and critical minerals is become a very major factor in competition between nations. And what it has also seen in parallel is a return of technology controls which people thought was beyond them, behind them in the era of globalization. The nature of weaponry, the nature of war has today fundamentally changed. We have seen that in multiple conflicts, starting with Azerbaijan-Armenia, Ukraine-Russia, Israel-Iran. So, contactless war, often with standoff weapons, but which can have a very impactful, sometimes even a decisive outcome. These are today the characteristics of this landscape of these turbulent times. And of course, the sentiment which characterizes these turbulent times is a growth in the opposition to globalization in many parts of the world. Now, the strategic consequences of this, I think, are quite obvious. We have seen a weakening, sometimes even discarding of international regimes and rules. We have seen economically that cost may not any longer be the definitive criteria, that ownership or security or reliability, resilience is equally important. We have seen politically that alliances and understandings are being revisited. We've also seen in a few cases, in the cases of really the major polities, that their belief in balance of power is probably much less. They seem to think they may not need the rest of the world as much as they did before. So if they have margins of power, they're prepared to exercise those margins in pursuit of their policies and actions. We have therefore seen overall the global needle move much more towards competition and away from compacts. And that global needle is moving because there is today a tendency to weaponize almost everything. And that if a state has a tool in its toolkit, an instrument to be used, there is much less reticence, particularly on the part of the major powers, to use that. Times are turbulent, to say the least, and we have, therefore, this challenge of how do we ensure prosperity. Now, every country faces this predicament. Obviously, so does India. But every country faces a different predicament. In the case of the United States, a country which, in a sense, underwrote the international system as we know it, has really been the harbinger of change. It is not only more assertive, but it has really allowed its or encouraged its national interest goals pretty much to drive its approach towards partnerships and cooperation. In the case of China, I think while they had clearly mastered the old system as we know it, this change perhaps catches them at a time when many of the new the new concepts, mechanisms, institutions which they were pushing are not yet in place. But clearly, what we can see is that the US-China relationship in many ways is going to influence the direction of global politics. In the case of Europe, what was a sweet spot in terms of US, Russia, China, US particularly security, Russia energy, China trade, has actually got turned around, and every one of those aspects today has become a challenge. In the case of East Asia, I think for a geography like ASEAN, being caught between US and China is a very difficult predicament. For those further east, the question marks about both economic and security question marks today are big concerns. In the case of Russia, you can see that their current goals and their future opportunities perhaps are not aligned on the same plane. But what is, I think in a way, what differentiates India is most of these regions, they are actually defending their interests. They are trying to maintain their positions. Whereas the challenge for India is how to go beyond that how do we rise in these turbulent times? Because for us, just defending what we have is simply not good enough. This has caught us at a time in our own history, in our own sort of curve, you can say, where we have to not only internalize and absorb these risks, but find a way of going beyond and continuing with our rise.